Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, January 10th, 2017. I'm sure you can probably detect it in my voice. But yes, as predicted, I am, of course, coming down with a winter something or other. So we'll try and struggle through a show and get one together for you today. Armando may be available at some point during the show, and perhaps he's got a little information, he usually does, to fill in with things, and we'll get a little back and forth, and that'll carry us through the show, I'm sure. If not, we got plenty of material, that's for sure. Greg Dworkin not with us this morning, but already sending articles along to keep us fortified like our breakfast cereals with 9 essential articles and vitamins and iron for each morning. Does iron help at all? Is iron going to do me any good in this cold? I never heard anybody say anything like that. But hey, I hope it's not going to linger, but that's probably just jinxed it right there. But yeah, we're gonna have to put some things together, and we're going to have a discussion about the future, ladies and gentlemen, of the Kagro in the Morning Show. I've got some projects in the offing that well, they'd really like to see undertaken over at Daily Kos, and I think they're important, and I'm not certain whether they will allow for as regular a broadcast this time around as we've had in years past. Which I really would regret. I mean, I've come to enjoy the routine, certainly, and I guess I hate breaking routine. But this would be important stuff. We're going to have to pay some serious attention to what's going on in Congress and the efforts of the Democrats, particularly those in the Senate, basically making sure nothing horrific happens. I don't know that that's even possible because all the rules have gone out the window. The last couple of days have just taught me, once again, we're back in LOL, nothing matters, YOLO territory, just like I said in the Morning Post. And I'll tell you why. We'll go over a couple of articles that will illustrate that pretty clearly. It's no different than what you have seen already, in the sense that they're all outrageous and they're all just take the rules, crumple them up, and throw them out. Doesn't make a difference what happens in the world. Just do what you want to do. I wish we could all do the same, but we're not all purported billionaires anyway. So we'll see how these things go. Anyway, Daily Kos Radio is live, cold or no. Bill tells us all the way from Portland, Maine, where it is cold. Hopefully he doesn't have a cold. How do you stay healthy in Portland, Maine, if I can't stay healthy in Virginia? Well, of course, we do have the kids going back and forth to school each day and carrying home all of the fun stuff that they, I guess, have become immune to in the hallways, but the rest of us at home remain vulnerable. Anyway, Daily Kos Radio is live, even if I'm not. After Trump attacks Meryl Streep, Kagro X, that's me, at least partially, David Waldman proclaims, today we are all overrated, and I feel that way. Certainly, I'll tell you this, winter colds are overrated as well. Okay, well, we'll drag our butt through the show as usual, and maybe we'll drag yours out too. Why not? Okay. So what do we have? First of all, let's take a look at what Greg has sent us for the morning, because that's usually a pretty good grounding in what most people, you guys, are reading about this morning. Well, I'll be darned if it isn't something about the alt-right and Nazis and white supremacy in the United States. An alt-right makeover shrouds the swastikas. I did see this one flying by on the New York Times. New York City bringing us the news on that one. And look, it's Serge Kovalevsky, the reporter mocked by Trump. Except, of course, Trump denies that he mocked him. I think that's where we are currently in that controversy. The Trump camp denies that they were mocking him at all. I'm not sure what they think that gestures, those gestures were supposed to be, but who cares? Again, YOLO, nothing matters. And I'll tell you, maybe we'll get to that story first, but let me see. Let's run down the article. You and I together will sort this out. We'll definitely want to hear a little bit more about the alt-right wackos and their rise to power. And that figures into my roundup as well. Let's see, something from Richmond.com. Virginia looking for Medicaid savings but fearing cuts from the repeal of the health law. Gosh, what are we to do? And that'll be, we've got some morning stuff about that too. Maybe we'll comment as we go down the list. Part of last night's roundup of stories. Let's open up the pocket. And at the minimum, we can talk about, okay, well, here are the things that I intend to get to, and then I won't get to them, but at least you'll know what they are, and you can read them. That's as good that's as what can we say? That's as much a function of this show as anything else. We'll turn you on at least to the stories that you need to read, even if I don't read them to you. Maybe we need to switch the show. If we can't do morning shows, we could turn to like bedtime stories with Kagro X, where I'll tell you horrible stories about the alt-right and what's going on in politics. That might keep you up at night. But on the other hand, I'm pretty sure I could probably bore you to sleep if I really try hard. I think it's doable. Let's see. So on Greg's list, the first, I have to switch between how many windows here? Okay, let's see. Over in Skype, there we are. There was the alt-right makeover thing. Yes, commenting on that part of my YOLO Nothing Matters roundup that is in pocket. We had, what did we get? Reports yesterday, and I don't know that they've been confirmed. I don't know if it's the kind of report you can confirm. I don't know where I would turn to confirm it. I don't know whether I would believe it if it was confirmed. I imagine that the Trump camp would deny it. But let's see. What did I put aside? Well, let's see. Which one of these is the tweet I'm looking for? Anyway, the news is that who calls him this? The two Charles Johnsons are involved in this one. There's Charles C. Johnson, the red-headed rage Furby, as he's referred to by the other Charles Johnson, the Little Green Footballs Charles Johnson, both of whom used to be right-wing activists, but Charles Johnson, Little Green Footballs guy, has had some sort of epiphany, which he wrote about the other day, once again, about why he migrated away from the old, like the George W. Bush freak out over terrorism era right wing, and parted ways with them. Anyway, let's see. Which one is, so Chuck Johnson, Rage Furby, like I said, the redheaded guy, the beard, huge internet troll, banned from Twitter, along with some other people who have been given reprieves. Some of them have come back, of course. Did I not? I know I put some of those aside, but there's so many articles from last night, it's hard to even keep up. Let's see. Anyway, so he is rumored to be advising the Trump White House from the outside, from outside of the transition offices, advising them on, I gather, people whom Trump might pick to fill administration jobs, whether political ones in the White House apparatus or outside in the agencies, to fill those spots with people who would be acceptable to and representative of this so-called alt-right, which is troubling because, if you remember anything about our Rage Furby guy, he's nuts. He's literally crazy. And this, again, feels like one of those Steve Bannon moves where it's an announcement or something that he gave the okay to somebody like Johnson to say was happening to drive the rest of the world crazy and to send us into a tizzy, either to distract from something or just to keep us angry and upset about something. And, it will sort of work. Unless, of course, you take the attitude, as I have, YOLO, nothing matters, LOL, whatever. And they're just going to continue to do this stuff over and over again. This is the guy, by the way, accused of, it's still a big question mark whether this really happened, I guess engaging in a fight of some kind, a verbal altercation with someone in college, and he decided, allegedly, that the way to settle this thing was, I guess, to drop his pants and take a crap on the floor. And I think that was supposed to show everybody how totally out of control he was, and so don't mess with him because he's psycho, and he is. And he's out there claiming to be advising the Trump administration in some capacity. And that's the sort of thing that there's really, again, I'm back to, why am I going to have my kids do their homework? What can I tell people? Stay in school, kids. What's the point? Crap in school is what you should be doing. I said it last night, except I said it in ways that you can say it on Twitter and not on the radio. Just do that. Because apparently you can do that and then announce that you're advising an incoming president-elect, and no one will say you're not. That's the interesting part. And, of course, if it were to catch fire and people were to take notice of exactly what kind of loon this guy really is, and luckily he exists, well, I don't know whether it's lucky or not. He exists in the shadows for the most part. But on no other planet would you be permitted to say, for even a minute, that you were advising a president-elect, except on Trump world. So what other things does YOLO, nothing matters, LOL, there are no rules, apply to? Well, let's see. There's this one we didn't touch on yesterday. Monica Crowley, who is, among other things, a former Fox News personality of some type, and now slated to play a role in the national security apparatus. I guess a sort of deputy national security advisor. Is that what they were calling her? Monica Crowley is Trump's pick for a top national security council job of some kind. This according to Alex Caton and Grace Watkins at Politico. But that's not the main thrust of the story. The main thrust of the story is that Trump picked Monica Crowley plagiarized, as they say, parts of her PhD dissertation. Of course, as others have pointed out, if it's your PhD dissertation and parts of it are plagiarized, the whole thing is plagiarized. PhD dissertations, I don't think, are the sorts of things that you can plagiarize part of. I don't know how serious. I mean, maybe, who knows? Maybe it's one of those things that they can try and deny, like I forgot to put a footnote in there. An examination of the dissertation and its sources, the sources it cites, identified more than a dozen sections, whoops, that's a lot, of text that have been lifted with little to no changes from other scholarly works without proper attribution. In some instances, Crowley footnoted her source but did not identify with quotation marks the text she was copying directly. In other instances, she copied text or heavily paraphrased with no attribution at all. The finding comes on the heels of CNN's Saturday report that Crowley, the conservative author and commentator whom Trump tapped as senior director of strategic communications for the NSC, plagiarized more than 50 passages of her 2012 book, What the Bleep Just Happened? And an appropriate question. What the bleep just happened? Somebody got a major national security job having plagiarized their PhD dissertation. All right. Well, apparently the book as well, copied directly from conservative columns, news articles, Wikipedia, and in one case, a podiatrist's website, the national security. What the bleep just happened? I got a plantar wart. I guess that's what happened. Despite the news, the Trump team continues to support the appointment. Of course, any attempt to discredit Monica is nothing more than a politically motivated attack that seeks to distract from the real issues facing this country, like plagiarism. Somebody had a great comment on Twitter last night just saying, well, maybe her PhD was in plagiarism, and you don't know. Maybe she's just that fantastic at these things. All right. Crowley's dissertation, by the way, titled Clearer Than Truth, somebody else's truth, Clearer Than Truth, Determining and Preserving Grand Strategy. By the way, there's 2 colons in this, which I think I'll just leave standing without any further comment. Clearer Than Truth, Determining and Preserving Grand Strategy, The Evolution of American Policy Toward the People's Republic of China under Truman and Nixon. Written in 2000, she's a younger person, in partial completion of her PhD in International Relations at Columbia University. They say New York's Columbia University. You know where Columbia University is. Because you're a coastal elite, you bastard. Today, the thesis is kept on microfilm at the University of Michigan and accessible via ProQuest, in case you were thinking of reading it, an academic database. I don't know why. It wasn't an academic paper, but okay. Part of Crowley's dissertation appears to violate Columbia's definition of unintentional plagiarism for failure to quote or block quote authors' exact words, even if documented, or failure to paraphrase in your own words, even if documented, In other cases, her writing appears to violate types 1 and 2 of Columbia's definition of intentional plagiarism. We have 2 flags on the play, which are respectively direct copy and paste and small modification by word switch without quotation or reference to the source. The examples Politico magazine found came primarily from 6 books and articles on U.S. foreign policy, particularly from Yale historian John Lewis Gaddis's 1982 book Strategies of Containment, a critical appraisal of American national security policy during the Cold War, and Princeton world politics professor Thomas Christensen's 1996 book Useful Adversaries, Grand Strategy, Domestic Mobilization, and Sino-American Conflict, 1947 to 58. Both Gaddis and Christensen declined to comment. I think it would be fine if Gaddis commented and Christensen just said ditto, but failed to provide a source. Got to let him off the hook for that. There's also, apparently there's more. By the way, her thesis advisor, Professor of War and Peace Studies, Richard K. Betts, declined to comment, as did Columbia University, which has previously rescinded at least one PhD for plagiarism. Not PhD in plagiarism. Right. Crowley was previously accused of plagiarism in 1999. This is becoming a problem. This is, and that's, by the way, before she did her dissertation, isn't it? When a reader in California noticed similarities between a Wall Street Journal column she wrote in that she wrote, and a 1988 Paul Johnson piece in Commentary. That is a sharp-eyed reader, unless it was Paul Johnson. After the discovery, the Journal published an editor's note in that week's Friday edition that read, "Had we known of the parallels, we would not have published the article. Crowley's position does not require Senate confirmation, so you can all suck it." Below are several of the most notable examples of plagiarism we found, we being Politico magazine, and you can see it side by side with highlighting. Very exciting. I hope you'll all take a look. If not, I don't know. Whatever. What can I tell you? Who cares? YOLO, nothing matters. All right. That was a side trip down the YOLO, nothing matters category. There is more. Let's just throw them out. I don't know that I necessarily need to read all the way through them, and then we can get through the rest of Greg's list as well. But another YOLO, nothing matters piece. This one by, do I have this correct? Yes, Tom Hamburger. Tom Hamburger, delicious, fantastic writer. Great with a little lettuce and tomato when the hamburger is nice and lean. I'm not the first. Okay, Sessions. Jeff Sessions. Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, you know the guy. Attorney General nominee. General jackass, plenty about him today in the news. The latest that I saw, Sessions failed to disclose oil interests as required, ethics experts say. I'll say this. First, he just left out all of his episode of being rejected for a federal judgeship from his ethics disclosure. Then they got past that, I guess, somehow. And now it's just one thing after another. He just keeps leaving bad stuff out of his ethics disclosure. Yesterday, I watched a little bit of the goings-on in the Senate. I'm going to have to do that more and more often. I watched. It was useless. By the way, all right, never mind. I'll leave that for later. But I watched John Cornyn say, commenting on the Sessions nomination, and he was saying, yeah, one of our advice and consent roles on one of the nominees will be much, much easier than others because it's Jeff Sessions, who we all know from years and years of service together. And there's a certain amount of truth to that. They knew exactly what kind of vicious racist they were getting when they nominated him. But yeah, apparently they know very little, apparently we all know very little about him. I don't know how much the senators knew. They know he was rejected for a judgeship, certainly. And the fact that he would leave that out had to be a little bit concerning privately to Republicans who had served with him and said, well, this is, what you're most famous for. This oil interest disclosure, of course, I don't know that would come out in any amount of service with him in the Senate, but the fact that you get kind of caught leaving something out and then you intentionally, if you don't go back and fill in every blank as carefully as possible at that point, you're not qualified. You're never going to be qualified for any kind of job like this. I suppose I have room intellectually to, okay, well, you're going to tell me that there's a huge, it was just a huge error and I'll never, ever, ever do it again, and we don't catch you a third time, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to vote for you, but anyway, you get the point. I can't tell whether he's doing it on purpose. I think he is. His people won't think he is. They'll say, how can you hold him responsible for just an unintentional mistake? But it's becoming a pattern with this guy now. So we'll put that one out there. We won't necessarily read through the article, though we may return to it, depending on whether Armando wants to take us there. Other YOLO Nothing Matters issues of the day. Let's see. What's this one? In some cases, I put aside tweets rather than articles, and sometimes the tweets lead to the articles, and I don't know whether I've covered this one or not. Okay, yes, this one was the Monica Crowley one, so we've got that one on the record. Let's get this one out of pocket. Get out of here, you. Let's see. Other Nothing Matters notes of the day. Let's see. Oh, yes, right over here. There's another update in the ethics office issue. This one from NBC News, and if I'm correct, yes, it's Ari Melber. He is noting the difficulties that the U.S. Ethics Office has had the Office of Government Ethics, that is, officially speaking, has had in getting information out of the Trump team. U.S. Ethics Office struggled to gain access to Trump team email show. They did a little bit of Freedom of Information Act searching and came up with this piece. The office tasked with overseeing ethics and conflicts in the federal government struggled to gain access to leaders in the Trump transition team and warned Trump aides about making decisions on nominees or blind trusts without ethics guidance, according to new emails obtained by MSNBC. The Office of Government Ethics Director, Walter Schaub, emailed Trump aides in November to lament that despite his office's repeated outreach, we seem to have lost contact with the Trump-Pence transition since the election. Trump aides may also be risking embarrassment for the president-elect, Schaub warned. That's not possible. By announcing cabinet picks without letting the ethics office review their financial information in advance. This is grab him by the... Yeah, all right. He's going to get all embarrassed. The perils for White House staff are even more severe, Schaub argued, because they might begin their jobs without crucial ethics guidance, raising a risk of inadvertently breaking federal rules. It's advertent, believe me. They run the risk of inadvertently violating the criminal conflicts of interest restriction at 18 U.S. Code 208, Schaub wrote, citing a federal conflicts law in an email to Trump transition aide Sean Ducey. He's a transition aide? Okay. If we don't get involved early to prevent problems, he added, we won't be able to help them after the fact. Schaub also warned that if Trump tried to create his own blind trust without the ethics office, the effort could be dead on arrival. The government might decide potential trustees were not independent, he cautioned, if Trump aides talked to them before consulting with the ethics office. Or, of course, the president-elect could arrive, inaugurate himself into office, essentially, and say, to hell with you, I'm closing the office or replacing you with somebody who will say everything is fine, and will say, oh my God, that's a horrible conflict of interest. And again, the answer will be, what are you going to do about it? And kablam, nothing is the likely answer. In contrast to most proposals floated by the Trump transition team, Schaub added, by the way, that the ethics office only considers a trust blind if its underlying assets have been sold off. So that ain't going to work. I think he has rescheduled his whole here's how I'm going to straighten out my conflicts issues press conference again for tomorrow. We'll see whether that goes forward or not. As they pointed out earlier, or as I mentioned earlier, the emails were obtained through a FOIA request. Let's see. Richard Painter, former ethics lawyer for George W. Bush, says the email exchanges suggest the ethics office is trying to touch base so they can take these issues seriously, while the Trump transition team evinces less desire to sit down and work through the issues. Norm Eisen, former ethics lawyer for Obama, offered ethics advice to Trump aides before the election and has criticized Trump's approach to business conflicts since his victory. Do you want the specifics of the criticism? It's nothing major. I mean, it's what you've heard all along. I think that's probably where I'll leave it at the moment. There's plenty more on that front, of course, including the official announcement, insofar as anything can be official from out of the Trump transition team, that Jared Kushner will in fact be advising Donald Trump in some capacity, probably as an unpaid but permanent White House advisor of some kind. Does that run afoul of anti-nepotism laws? Depends who you ask. The YOLO Nothing Matters school says YOLO Nothing Matters. The Nuh-uh It Doesn't school that has its own argument. And then there is a somewhat interesting and maybe even potentially successful legalistic argument that argues that, one, there being no salary involved, they would argue about the definition of being employed by the White House or any agency of the government. And two, I think the better of the two claims, is that, and by better I mean less ridiculous, but anything goes. This is definitely the try anything era. And I'll comment on that perhaps a little bit after I mention this. But the thinking on the part of the Trump transition team is that the White House and the president's personal executive office staff simply doesn't fit under the definition of agency of the federal government, that it's not an agency, it's something else. A little bit like when Dick Cheney said that the vice presidency, because it had both legislative and executive powers, really represented some sort of strange, mystical fourth branch of some kind and couldn't be considered subject to any, really almost anything, any laws that addressed themselves to the three branches of government, because he was some hybrid of two of them, and so therefore free to operate as he pleased. Which turned out largely to be true, not legally speaking, but pragmatically speaking. In practical terms, he did operate pretty much as he pleased. And although many people who we would regard as very serious commentators were certain he was in violation of the law, no one was able to establish it in any concrete way. So, whoops, okay. We have that problem. There are a few more, of course. Let's see. Well, we won't shoehorn that one into this particular discussion. But, yeah, there's more on Jared Kushner and more profiles of him and just more discussion of who the hell is this guy and where did he come from that we might want to turn to in the near future. Let's move on down Greg's list here because there were some other items. Right, the story of Virginia looking for Medicaid savings but fearing cuts from the repeal of the health care law. Did I put this one aside? There was claims yesterday by late last night that, where can we put this one? Pardon me. Okay, I had to actually mute that one for, that's the first of the cold sneezes. Greg, what does this mean exactly? How long have I got, Doc? Be straight with me. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay, I'm finding the section. I really crammed a lot of stuff in there last night. My immediate first reference here is to New York Magazine's piece from yesterday, Jonathan Chait, reestablishing our Jonathan Corner. I don't know if we have any other participants in the Jonathan Corner today, but if we do, they'll likely be on Greg's list. Obamacare repeal might have just died tonight. That would have been last night. And what a great night to die that would have been, because I would not have had this problem of trying to get through this show. Armando, I see, has given me the heads up that he's available at any time. And I'll wave you in at this point. I don't know. I'd love to have your comment on these things and be able to take a pause once and again for a sip of water. Anyway, Obamacare repeal might have just died tonight. Jonathan Chait reporting that the basics, long story short here, is it is a 52-48 split in the Senate, if you're counting the independents, Angus King and Bernie Sanders, as caucusing with Democrats. And they do caucus with Democrats, and they typically vote with Democrats. A 52-48 split is pretty tight. And even for measures that they plan to cram through either in reconciliation or as part of the budget or wherever else they think it might be filibuster proof, 52 is a pretty narrow margin. And when the issue is repealing Obamacare without anything to replace it with, or without anything sufficient anyway to replace it with, Republican senators are in fact reporting anyway that they're getting nervous. Whether or not they stay nervous when push comes to shove is a question mark, to be sure. But Jonathan Chait notes that there are more than the 3 that it would take, theoretically, if everybody's there and voting as we expect them to vote, to put at least a serious dent in the plans to repeal and or replace Obamacare. The Republican plan to do this and to delay implementation of the repeal with a promise to come up with a terrific replacement later, Jonathan writes, is probably the party's best way to destroy Obamacare. Unfortunately for Republicans, it's also the best way to destroy the Republican majority in Congress. Something big is happening in the Senate right now. The Republican plan, affirmed again today by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, is facing dire peril from Republican defections. We have yet to see where they'll end up, but okay. Republicans need a House majority, 50 Senate votes, and soon-to-be President Trump to pass and then sign into law, repeal and delay. If Republicans lose 3 Senate votes, that drops them to 49, and repeal and delay cannot pass, provided everyone shows up and votes, and sometimes that's a question mark. At least 3 Republican senators, in addition to all the Democrats, now oppose repeal and delay. Rand Paul, of all people, has demanded that Congress repeal Obamacare at the same time it passes a plan to replace it. Paul has announced that he spoke with Trump and secured his agreement on this. I don't know what that's worth, but that's what he says. Trump has not said so himself, confining his comments to date to a vague assurance that's all going to work out. He's an idiot, so it's not worth anything. Trump, of course, tends to change his mind frequently and agree with whomever he spoke with last. I'm glad Jonathan and I agree on that. But other Republican senators are taking the initiative. Fellow Republican Lamar Alexander says the same thing as Paul. We have to take each part of it and consider what it would take to create a new and better alternative, and then create that alternative. And once it's available to the American people, then we can finally repeal Obamacare. Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas said on MSNBC, it would not be the right path for us to repeal Obamacare without laying out a path forward. And Senator Bob Corker is walking right up to the edge of the same position, asking Trump to tweet out confirmation of what Paul claims he promised. If it is his view, it would be really good if he would consider tweeting it out very clearly. That's hilarious. There's more and more concerns about not doing it simultaneously, Corker said. Even more ominously for the Republican leadership, 4 other Republicans have joined Corker to sponsor a bill delaying the bill that would repeal Obamacare for a month. You have to have a bill to do that? Oh, no. Okay, I've read that wrong. 4 other Republicans have joined Corker well, it does say that, to sponsor a bill delaying a bill. I doubt that's actually the case, but let's see. Oh, yeah. So, that's what this written piece of, I don't know what this is exactly, but it's attached to a Sahil Kapoor tweet. Senators introduce amendment to improve process for repealing and replacing health care law in timely fashion. An amendment that would ensure incoming Trump administration can effectively outline priorities. I'm sure this is a press release of some kind from Corker's office. The senators named herein: Corker, of course, of Tennessee; Rob Portman of Ohio; Susan Collins of Maine, who's extraordinarily concerned, I'm sure; Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, who claims to be a doctor, by the way. Saw him on the floor yesterday. And Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who is usually also deeply troubled, but breaks late Republican, as many Republicans do. Anyway, they introduced an amendment to extend the deadline for budget reconciliation instructions. Until March 3rd, 2017, and ensure a responsible process for replacing President Obama's health care law as quickly as possible. That makes slightly more sense. Sahil's comment here: 5 Republican senators offer an amendment to extend the Obamacare repeal reconciliation deadline by more than a month. Portman, Collins, Cassidy, and Murkowski have not joined the other 3 in formally opposing any bill that repeals Obamacare without a replacement. But their willingness to buck their party leadership and try to delay a vote that McConnell hopes to rush through as quickly as possible indicates severe reservations about repeal and delay. Meanwhile, numerous Republican governors who don't have a vote on it but can nonetheless exert pressure are lobbying Washington Republicans to protect the parts of the law that their states rely on. The stated goal of the dissenters is mild. They merely want to take a little more time to clarify what comes next. You would think that after 6 years we would have a pretty good sense of what we'd like to do, explains Corker. Of course, they don't have a good sense of what to do, says Jonathan. They have some vague concepts without agreement, and any Republican plan, when fleshed out, turns out to be extremely risky. Conservatives hate Obamacare because it redistributes too much money from the rich and healthy to the poor and sick. I'm poor and sick. I like this. But they don't publicly attack the law on that basis. Instead, they attack it for high premiums, high deductibles, and narrow choice of doctors and hospitals, all flaws that any Republican plan would have in much higher doses. Republicans have yet to unify around a single, concrete, scorable plan because it's conceptually impossible to design a healthcare plan that meets conservative ideological goals and is also acceptable to the broader public. In other words, the dissenters pretend they just want to give the GOP a little more time to design its plan, but more time isn't going to help. There's never going to be a Republican plan. Republican leaders like McConnell promise the replacement will come soon thereafter, but people in the insurance and medical industries aren't idiots, typically. They know later means never. Senate mechanics also explain why it's so significant to demand that Obamacare be replaced at the same time it's repealed. Republicans can use a budget reconciliation bill to defund Obamacare. A reconciliation bill can evade a filibuster and pass with just 50 senators, but that bill can't create a new system because reconciliation bills can only be used to change taxes and spending, unless, of course, you hire a new parliamentarian who says, yes, it can. Which I'm now going to have to attach, LOL, nothing matters, YOLO warnings to everything, and that's the warning there. The insurance regulations requiring insurers to cover essential benefits, to not discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions, and so on, those aren't taxes and spending. They can only be altered with a regular bill subject to a filibuster. Again, for now. That means if Republicans want to actually put a new system into place and not just turn the healthcare market into a smoking crater, they need at least 8 Senate Democrats to join them. What that means is that replacing Obamacare at the same time it's repealed would create completely different parameters for what happens next. There aren't going to be 8 Democrats willing to support a right-wing bill that throws people into catastrophic coverage plans that don't cover basic medical care, as conservatives would like, and I do not know why they want that. It would be a coalition to patch up Obamacare with incremental changes. Maybe Republicans would call it repeal of Obamacare and replacement with something that's about 90% similar, but that would be symbolic. A bipartisan law would advance Obamacare's goals rather than destroy them. That's why repeal and delay was the best chance to destroy Obamacare. The gamble was that by blowing up the healthcare system on a fuse, Republicans could pressure Senate Democrats into going along with a Republican-friendly replacement. The details might be unpopular, but coerced Democratic support might give it cover. But this plan only works if 50 Senate Republicans are willing to gamble that they can hold the 1/7 of the economy consumed by healthcare hostage and force a bunch of Democrats to go along. If that gamble fails, the ruin could easily trigger a backlash against the majority party. But you won't have anything that you can do about it for 2 years, but okay. Apparently not enough Senate Republicans are willing to roll the dice. If this holds, Obamacare or something substantially similar is probably going to survive. That's actually pretty good news, but do you get the gamble that they're taking here? Not just the gamble with their majority, the gamble on what Democrats might do, and it's not a bad gamble. They're thinking, if we light the fuse definitively and say Obamacare's gone at X date, and we have that long to come up with a quote-unquote replacement, right? At that point, do Democrats say, well, we're going to vote against all of it? Well, of course we'll vote against lighting the fuse. But do Democrats also say, this alternative is so terrible that I don't even actually prefer it personally, politically, or pragmatically to no replacement whatsoever. In other words, if they light the fuse that will destroy Obamacare by a date certain, however long they think they need to come up with a compromise replacement plan, if Democrats refuse to go along with it and they are unable to pass it because an affirmative new plan would require enough votes to get past a filibuster, again, provided they don't simply change the rules in between then and now. But if Democrats don't provide those votes, then the fuse reaches the end, Obamacare is repealed, and nothing replaces it. So will there be Democrats who say, the Republican alternative is terrible, I would never vote for it on its own merits, but I would rather at least have catastrophic coverage in place than nothing? Or do they hold the line and say, you own this? It's a tough call, only because I know these Senate Democrats, and sometimes they do things that are a little weird, and sometimes they do it for good reasons, sometimes for bad. Sometimes it's, I don't want to be bounced out of office, and that's the most important thing in the world to me. Sometimes it's, I hate this. This is horrific. I would never vote for this, but there are people who I know who will die without at least the catastrophic coverage. At least I can get them that. This thing is gone. The fuse is lit. What should I do? And you have to be able to say, I believe that this will create a disaster that people will lay at the feet of Republicans and not Democrats if I don't vote for this thing, and roll the dice and go for it. And people are going to have to die along the way. It's going to be a tough thing to do. And more to the point, most Democrats will in fact find themselves in the middle, a hybrid of the two positions. One, I can't just leave people to die. And two, I do want to stay in office because if I'm not in office, somebody else who doesn't care about killing people might end up in office instead. It's a legitimate fear. It's going to be interesting, and they're going to need to hear from you about what you want them to do and about how you're going to have their backs if they say no to a lousy half-assed replacement out of fear that people will die if there's nothing in place. There's also, of course, the gamble that Republicans will blink and that they'll light the fuse and then come up with a last-minute, a pair of those little scissors to snip off the fuse just before it gets to the charge. Because they can do that, too. And that's probably the most important piece to keep in mind. It would be very difficult for them to design a piece of legislation that would light such a fuse that they couldn't tamp out if necessary, if they really thought. I mean, what if it was their fault that they couldn't get the thing together? There has to be an out. You can always just say, let's pass an extension, just like as you would a continuing resolution. There's going to be a government shutdown if we don't have an agreement on funding by midnight of this date. And at 11:30, you pass a thing that says 2 more weeks of the same. You can do the same thing. And Senate Democrats shouldn't forget it, and they should force them to kick the can a couple of times. That would be my advice to them. Are they listening? I don't know. Are we going to make them listen? That's part of the project going forward. We're going to have to, it looks like I'm going to end up having to monitor activity in the Senate and see how they're doing at slowing things down where they have the opportunity and keeping the Senate tied up in knots so that the worst things can't be done. Again, we'll talk more about what that means and what that might mean for the show in the coming days. Maybe as soon as tomorrow. I don't know. Anyway, at the moment, in case you were wondering, why am I not monitoring the Senate now? I don't think they're actually in session yet. And if you have been listening to the suggestions that we've been making, perhaps reading between the lines of Marcos's post from the other day, detailing the fact that there are some 1,200 to 1,400 positions in the executive branches and the judicial judgeships. Judicial judgeships. That's a little redundant, but judicial seats that are currently vacant. But I think the 1,200 to 1,400 number just represents the executive branch. Doesn't even count vacancies on the bench. But that's how many positions require Senate advice and consent. Again, I'm not certain how they arrive at the number, but I do think those are the executive positions. That number can change, of course, by statute. You can agree to reduce the number. You can exempt different positions from Senate advice and consent. But technically speaking, if you were to put up a fight on every single one of those nominations, provided there were names attached to them, if you were to put up a fight about each one of them, they are not subject to filibuster any longer. That is to say, I guess we should put it this way, we'll be very precise in our language. Cloture can be invoked on those nominations by a simple majority vote. So we, by shorthand, have been saying, well, it's not subject to filibuster. Well, yes, it is. You get up, you make speeches, you say, I'm not going to stop, and we're not going to have a vote on this guy. The majority, though, says, yes, we are, and they would then have to invoke cloture on your ongoing speeches and protests, and that process has not changed. Nothing about filibuster reform changed that. You would still have to file a petition for cloture signed by, I forget even what the number is, 16 senators? I forget what number they have to ask for. The motion for cloture would have to ripen. That is, a 24-hour period would have to pass in between the day on which you filed and the day on which you have your vote. You'd have the vote. Of course, it would only take a simple majority of those present and voting, I believe, in order to invoke cloture. But then guess what? The cloture rules themselves, again, haven't changed. Thereafter, you would have a maximum of 30 hours of additional debate on the nomination on which you've just invoked cloture. Well, 30 hours per nomination. If you really and truly did it for every single one, well, let's just pull the calculator out here. If we assume 1,200 executive positions, oops, that's the clock. I don't want that. I want the calculator. 1,200 executive positions, that's the low end of the figure, times 30 hours, just by way of calculations here, it's 36,000 hours. Divided by 24, because that's how many there are. That's 1,500 days around the clock, 24/7. 1,500 days, of course. Well, just here, 365 of those. 4.1 years. Wow, it's the next administration. Well, and that allows no other time for any other legislating whatsoever. Now, before you get your hopes up, one, allowing for no other legislation whatsoever means government shutdown. And maybe you're into that now, or maybe you're worried about that being laid at the feet of the minority party. That can be dealt with, and you don't have to shut down the government. And of course, with the extra 0.1 years on there, you've got some room to play with. Of course, more likely would be that Donald Trump would have no interest whatsoever in filling all 1,200 of those positions. Those positions typically get filled, in case you were wondering, how does that ever happen? By unanimous consent. Why would they happen by unanimous consent? Because I believe I've used this example before. No one cares who is on the St. Lawrence Seaway Commission. Not even people who live near the St. Lawrence Seaway, largely. And so confirming those people by unanimous consent, usually what happens, and also, though, previously in other administrations, there has been a pretty good chance that the people named to the St. Lawrence Seaway Commission are not didn't crap on the floor in anybody's dorm room when they were in college and weren't recommended by anyone who did. Although, some of these Ivy League schools, they're wild places. But still, the point is, even in Skull and Bones, they probably didn't do that. But this news that Charles C. Johnson is somehow advising the White House on who to place where makes it very, very dangerous. You might, in fact, be putting a lunatic, white separatist, Nazi sympathizing alt-right weirdo on, what difference would it make if they're on the St. Lawrence Seaway Commission? I don't know. They might try to blow up the St. Lawrence Seaway. They might do nothing. They might simply treat it as a no-show job and collect the money. But we shouldn't even want that. The fact that we don't know hardly anything about their the cabinet picks that the guy is making, because they're not making any ethics disclosures. Think about what happens at the lower levels where they're complete mysteries to us. It used to be, they were always political hacks, but think about the politics of these particular hacks and who's naming them. The Senate Democrats, really, honestly, at this point, you can't agree to unanimous consent on a raft of nominations unless you actually literally check each one of these people out. I mean, just Google them. That might be all that's necessary. But you really, at this point, you should be using as leverage the agreement to allow some of these appointments through. You can say, I'll give you 100 at a time, maybe, or even, I don't know, narrow it down to 10. Or you can use them as penalties. As you know, they're having these confirmation hearings now before the appointments are officially made. And that's typical. That usually does happen. But it almost never happens without an ethics disclosure having been completed. And so while Democrats are calling on Republicans to delay hearings, and it's working for Betsy DeVos, as I understand. Or did we say DeVos? I don't know. Anyway, that lady, you know her. They're delaying that one. But right now, it's just that's all there is to it. I'm going to call on Republicans to delay, and Republicans will say, I don't hear that call, or I don't care what that call is. We're going forward. Democrats ought to lay out some form of punishment, I think, and pick a number out of a hat, whatever you want it to be, 10, 15, 100. I would say anytime you convene a hearing on somebody whose ethics review isn't completed, that's 100 executive positions I will refuse to allow unanimous consent on ever. And I want roll call votes and cloture votes on every one of them. That's 300 to 3,000 hours of post-cloture time alone I'm going to take out of your hide if you convene one of these hearings without an ethics disclosure being finished. I don't know whether they're going to take that seriously or not. And some of it you're going to have to map this whole strategy out very carefully, because if you start confirming, for instance, undersecretaries or deputy secretaries in some places, and then blockade the top levels, either the cabinet secretary, or maybe you blockade deputy secretaries and fill in from beneath, or you allow them to start filling civil service positions that might have been vacated by people who don't want to serve in a Trump administration, and they're filled with Trump loyalists. In some cases where there's no secretary, the deputy secretaries are empowered by statute to make certain decisions as acting secretary. And it may go, in some cases, it goes down the line. And for all we know, Chuck C. Johnson's friend at the St. Lawrence Seaway Commission might end up finding himself in the absence of a confirmed deputy undersecretary somewhere making the decisions. So it doesn't always necessarily make sense to keep those positions empty either. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. Anyway, speaking of lots of moving parts, Armando has been waiting patiently. I've asked him to come in here and relieve me, and it doesn't actually sound like I need that relief, but I am glad to have you. Hi, Armando.
No, you sound good. I'll add to two things that we mentioned: Sessions
yes.
and voting. I think you were talking about it in the context of ACA, but somehow it may have slipped over to Sessions. On filibuster, my understanding is that there is no filibuster anymore for executive appointments.
I was explaining that the technicalities of there are filibusters. It's just that cloture requires only a simple majority to invoke, but all the other rules that go along with cloture still apply.
So they can still take the 72 hours and all that other
30,
stuff.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And plus, of course, the 24-hour period just to ripen the cloture motion itself. So you could run them about you could, if you really just slowed it down, they could still force through about a nomination a week.
Right. So that's one thing. They given the ethics excuse, they certainly should look very hard at doing that and just saying we're not going to agree to a vote fast track without ethics. And I think that probably get some support from the media. But the other thing, though, was on ACA and repeal.
Okay. Yeah.
The repeal of the Affordable Care Act is not revenue neutral. I think the analysis is pretty clear. I understand they had a package of rules where they said CBO can't score ACA repeal, which is unbelievable in and of itself. But that doesn't impact the Byrd rule, does it? I mean, it does. Can't you still make an objection? to the parliamentarian and say this isn't revenue neutral?
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly make that objection, and I guess it's a question mark. What does the parliamentarian think of the lack of a score? Like, if you object and say it's not revenue neutral, and the way you establish revenue neutrality is with a CBO score that says it's revenue neutral, we don't have one at all here because they're prohibited from scoring it. It might have said it was revenue neutral. I don't think it would have. But the fact is that the report isn't here, so you can't possibly allow this to go forward. To which, again, the answer could be, yes, I can. And then the Senate says, well, we appeal that ruling. Okay, it's 52-48. You lost. It can go forward.
Yeah, obviously,
Sure.
the sheer power.
I have to put that caveat on everything now, but yeah.
Right. But I forget, does the Byrd rule actually incorporate the CBO score expressly? I mean, obviously by custom it has.
Yeah, but I don't know that it does, and I guess those are things we'll have to reread. I think I knew those things better one day in the distant past, but
at the end of the day, I forget how the parliamentarian choice works. I mean, did McConnell name somebody new? Is it the same guy? I actually have no idea.
I think it's actually the same person. It's a woman who was named by Harry Reid and the Democrats and kept on, which is a nice thing. And they do tend to do that. They have changed parliamentarians with the change of partisan control in the past, but it's not always done because they are pretty professional and everybody appreciates that. Believe it or not.
I tell you what's weird. Tell me, can the House just make a rule that binds the Senate that says they can't get a CBO score on the actual repeal?
I doubt that that's the case. They can only say that it won't be necessary or that we don't care what the CBO says here in the House. They can, I mean, there's various things they can do. They could make it prohibit funding of the activity required to score such a bill from the House side and force the CBO to either come up with its own funding somehow, unless the Senate somehow agrees. If the Senate doesn't agree, then no. I mean, certainly a senator can still ask for a CBO score, but I do wonder internally what sort of rules the CBO has. Like if we're asked by one House to score this thing and the other House forbids us by rule from scoring it, what should we do? Who should we provide it to? I mean, my answer inside the CBO is score it, give it to the senator that asked. If the House wants to deny it exists, that's their issue, but everybody can see it. If they really want to run on fake news as a platform, I guess they can. Certainly have every opportunity to do that now. But I don't know. I mean, it'll depend on what lurks inside the CBO's rulebook somewhere too.
Right, and of course there's we're talking, I guess, about procedural maneuvers. I mean, the idea that we're talking about is sticking act of repeal of budget resolution, right?
Yeah.
And how germane is that to the budget? I don't know. It would have to be a ruling because, of course, the filibuster still exists for legislation that isn't budget related, correct?
Right. Yeah, so the budget, of course, is protected from filibuster by law, which is the answer to why am I not watching now to see whether they're objecting to unanimous consent requests. The answer is unanimous consent requests usually, in this context, now that they are considering the budget, they won't delay anything. There's a 50-hour debate cap on the budget in the Senate, and after 50 hours of debate, depending on how you calculate it, they agree on how to calculate it. At 50 hours, they start voting on all the amendments, no matter how many there are, no matter how many they've debated. They just start voting. So there's no delay to be had at the moment, in case you were wondering.
Yeah, I mean, right. It's in the weeds, but yeah, I thought that was what was going on.
Yeah.
Because I've listened to Kagro in the morning enough to recognize some of these procedural points. Related to that, though, is it seems to me anyway that you started with Chait article on his fairly optimistic take that somehow Affordable Care Act is in danger. I'm actually a little more cynical about it. I don't think they have a problem repealing Affordable Care Act. They just don't want to get blamed for what happens next. The 20 million people or 20 million plus people who are going to lose insurance. And that's why I'm actually more worried about a different plan that you might have heard about, which is the cost-sharing provisions that were struck down by a 3-judge panel of the D.C. Circuit. Obviously, I think when it goes to a full panel, this is where it becomes interesting. We'll overturn that 3-judge panel. I mean, there's a 7-4 advantage, I believe, for Democrats and the D.C. Circuit. So if it goes en banc, that ruling's likely to be overturned. But that ruling only goes en banc if, after January 20th, one Jefferson Beauregard Sessions decides to continue the appeal.
Yes, that's true.
And this is where I'm getting at. You take out that cost savings provision, you're basically going to wreck the exchanges, because at that point it just collapses on itself because you don't have a high risk pool, and it becomes completely impossible for insurance companies to survive without basically pushing people into junk, and it just basically would undermine everything. So that's one way, I think, and I'm sure they're looking at it hard, that they can do a de facto ACA repeal and maybe not have their fingerprints on it. So, hey, the court just said that you can't do it.
Yeah. Well, that's true, and that would probably work for most people who would not realize that. Well, and even if they did realize, that could have been appealed, and it would have been appealed under the Obama administration. And of course, the answer is, well, it ain't going to be repealed under this administration. So the court said no. We love courts right now, so we're just going to let that stand. And, I mean, if it doesn't say on the news that Republicans in the Congress voted to do it.
Exactly.
I got to, it's time for me to go get a pickup truck, man. I can't figure this out.
It collapsed on itself. It was the Democrats' fault.
Right.
Listen, I'm telling you.
Just like they said it was going to happen. Yeah.
Right. That would be, and I'd be curious if you have Joan tomorrow to ask her more about that particular gambit. I know a letter was written by Mike Lee and Ben Sasse to the Trump transition team, urging him to abandon the appeal of the cost sharing. So that's something to keep an eye on in terms of ACA. I think that if they can destroy it without having to take a vote, they're going to do it. Yeah. And this seems to be the most promising, in a negative way for us, way for them to go at it, this court case.
It sounds like it.
I don't know if there was any way to expedite, and I don't know what the Obama administration has strategized on that, but I'd keep my eye on that.
Have you got an article discussing that anywhere? I'll have to make a note.
I'm almost sure Joan has written about it, to be honest with you, but I don't have one handy.
All right, I'll make a note to myself.
But I'm pretty sure she's looked at that pretty closely. So I say to the listeners to tune in tomorrow, and hopefully Kagro can get some information from Joan on that. I just don't have it on the tip of my fingers. I did read that letter. Do you want me to try to find that letter for you?
Maybe later on, certainly. But
okay.
I'm making a note.
The other thing I would say about today, because Sessions is up. Look, on his face, the guy's unacceptable. Let's be honest here.
Yeah.
But we're living in a world where Donald Trump's going to be president, so unacceptable doesn't mean what it used to mean.
Right. Yeah, I don't like living with this. There you have it. Unacceptable. Okay.
Right. But if you want to tie it to Trump, one of the things that I just pointed out on Twitter was the thing that's sort of untold about Sessions. He supplied the racism message in the Trump campaign early on. I mean, I think I remember telling you when I went to the Trump rally in Florida in March that there was these speeches, and one of them was by a Sessions staffer who had been loaned out to the Trump campaign, Stephen Miller, I think is his name.
Yes, okay.
And he gave one of the most virulently racist speeches I've ever seen.
Wow.
In person. And it was Sessions, and I talked about that then. And I said one of the reasons I know that Trump is running a racist campaign is he's basically put Jefferson Sessions and his people in charge of the messaging. That whole immigration message, the killer immigrants, that's all Sessions. Trump said it, but he got it from Sessions.
That's not good.
Yeah, it's just something that I think people should be aware about because Martin Luther King and he did a desegregation. Come on, first of all, that's nonsense. But I don't have to go back to his past. I can just go back to this campaign. And the guy who provided Trump with all the aids for messaging on racism was the person nominated to become Attorney General. So it's not like I'm going into the past to figure out, well, he's a different man now. Remember, Byrd was in the KKK. No. This is 2016 stuff.
Miller
by Sessions and his people.
Yeah, Miller is said to be the chief author, well, depending on whether you believe reports that Donald Trump says, I'm going to write my inaugural address myself, which actually probably could happen. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it if he was going to give a good speech, but I could absolutely see him saying, to hell with it.
He can't write more than 140 characters. I mean, he can't write.
But Miller is said to be the other reports that, the more credible reports of I'm having someone help me with it. It's Miller, the guy you're talking about.
Exactly. And Miller is Sessions. So, I mean, and people say, well, that's why you need to confirm him because we just elected the guy and this is the guy that was elected. I said, well, no, I don't have to. If you have enough votes, if you're 52 people are going to vote for him, and they probably will. Maybe Manchin will go with him too, and you'll lose a few more, but I don't have to vote for him. Yeah. You got the votes or you don't.
Well, that's true. You certainly don't have to help them do it. Where did I see this the other day? That there was reports that the Republicans in the Senate were particularly skittish. They were frightened that the defeat of perhaps any, but maybe just the most prominent of Trump's nominees would mean that Trump would the defeat would obviously mean that some Republicans would have voted no, and he would single out those Republicans for reprisals, because that's the kind of guy he is. They're all worried that if a single one of them goes down, Trump's going to go rogue on the Senate Republicans.
And do what?
I don't know. At this point, I guess anything. Or, I mean, it may only be for them, all they really need to worry about, or it'd be enough to scare them. Trump's going to tweet mean things about them, and then people are going to Photoshop them into gas chambers or what have you, and bother them for a long time. They're used to that, but it may also be, who knows? I mean, Trump almost certainly believes, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of workarounds he demands. But Trump is the kind of guy who I think will, storm into a meeting and say, this guy from, whatever state it is, this guy from Wyoming actually said no to me. What do we have in Wyoming that we can kill? I just want all federal money that's going there. How can I stop federal projects in Wyoming? And I'll be looking around. It's not that easy, typically, but of course it's easier if you're willing to say, and I don't care if it's legal or not, let him sue me. Yeah, he again will not distinguish between me and the government. He makes no distinction between ownership and custody. Is the way I had put it back, I think, in like September. If he gets control of the government, he'll think it's essentially to be run like the Trump organization. I say it, you do it, and that's mine, and that money that's being spent on a dam in Utah is my money, and I can say no to it if I want to. So there'll be some protracted legal battles, many of which he will lose, but will nonetheless cost us lots of money. But in the meantime, yeah, there may be people who who are up for re-election, who are concerned that you really would have a Republican president campaigning against a sitting Republican incumbent senator seeking re-election and instead backing some kind of primary challenger. And I don't know whether it goes into the general or not, but okay. But, these are the things that they worry about, and I'm sure they'd rather just say, to hell with it.
But I'm just skeptical of it. I mean, I know this guy in Ohio lost the party chairmanship, but
yeah. I don't know whether it'll work, and somebody's got to test it. Somebody should. I'm sure there's a Republican in a position to say, and certainly Republican senators, senators generally, although they're skittish about losing elections, are also pretty proud of themselves.
I get that. But I mean, at some point, being in the position means you want to do something.
Yes.
What do you need Trump for? I mean, I just don't buy the whole Trump's going to go after a whole bunch of Republicans in the midterm.
I believe that he might, but I don't know that it will make a great deal of difference. I think you make a good point, and these senators, like I was going to say, they're pretty proud of themselves and where they've gotten themselves, and they feel in many cases, pretty untouchable. Certainly, a president going after them personally isn't going to help very much, but they're there because they have their own bases in their respective home states, and presumably if they feel confident in their control of those bases and their popularity there, they might be willing to have that fight. But they'd rather not. But somebody probably somewhere along the line will say, well, I just can't go along with something, whether it's a nomination or a piece of legislation. And if it's a fight, then it's a fight, but I got to have it. And maybe it's best for all of us if someone does, and it's me, and I'm in control of my base, and I can do this.
Well, here's an interesting one that's percolating today is McCain and Graham joined. What's more than just McCain and Graham? It's McCain, Graham, Sass, Rubio, and there was a fifth Republican, along with Cardin from Maryland, and a couple of Democrats. It's sort of like 7 or 8 senators are trying to codify Russia sanctions that Obama put in and add some other ones.
Uh-huh.
I think that's just for a headline, to be honest with you. McConnell's still the majority leader, right? So, don't hold your breath waiting for that to come to a vote. And it's certainly not going to come for a vote before January 20th, and Trump won't sign it. I assume that's intended to be something, but in terms of standing up to Trump or what have you. But, it's not going to impact anything, I don't think. I mean, it's just going to say, see, we're not his puppets, or we're not his rubber stamps, or we do take this Russia thing seriously. I'm not sure that it really means anything in terms of anything that's going to happen in terms of legislation.
Yeah. Well, not likely.
So, when you game it out, what does Ryan want? What does McConnell? McConnell wants special tax breaks for whoever he wants special tax breaks for. That's what McConnell is. I don't know what Ryan necessarily wants. He wanted, as always, entitlement reform, but I don't think Trump's going along with cutting Social Security and Medicare. That's not what his movement's about. Those are white programs, as I call them. And I don't mean, what I mean is everything's a white program. Medicaid's a white program.
Well, true.
But perception-wise, Medicare and Social Security are white programs. Don't touch my, keep the government's hands off my Medicare is the classic. Right. And I think it embodies, the Trump movement. So I don't know that Ryan's going to get anywhere with that. Trump definitely doesn't want it. I don't think. This is where I disagree with you. But they will have a lot of leeway in cutting Medicaid and cutting other programs to benefit the less well off. It seems to me. And is that what Republicans want? What is it that Republicans actually want besides tax cuts, which they always do? Is there something else that they're looking for from
I don't
Trump?
Maybe. I don't know what it is.
I'm asking you a genuine question. I'm just curious what their agenda is.
I don't know. I don't think I have anything ready at hand. Certainly, there's a list out there other people are more familiar with, and if they said it, I'd say, oh, yeah, sure, one of those. Yeah, tax cuts, obviously. But who knows? I mean, they don't even the bedrock principles are gone in terms of like, balanced budget. Well, nobody's necessarily for that one anymore. If it gets in the way of building the wall or whatever, or repealing Obamacare, a small government, not really, not so much, especially,
Yeah, I mean, they don't care about that. They don't care about deficits. I mean, and you try to figure out what do they really care about. And
yeah, bathroom bills. I mean, things like that. Social war, what do they call it? Culture war issues.
I mean, I do think that no one has really reported out, well, what are they going to do? What do they want to do? Well, they want to eliminate regulations. I get that.
Yes.
And they'll do that, almost certainly. So there's that. The Affordable Care Act is the most substantive thing that people have talked about. And, of course, they've talked about repealing. They voted 58,000 times to repeal it, obviously, knowing that it would never be approved by Obama. So it was sort of pointless. Now, obviously there's this group who say, well, we need a replacement before we repeal or something along those lines. I'm actually kind of curious to see what it is they think they want. There's 15 alternatives, a consensus around 15 plans. I mean, that's like saying no consensus, obviously. So it's not clear that they've got anything figured out. Now, look, here's the thing they do have figured out. A guy like Sessions, and by the way, Chris Cillizza, being Chris Cillizza,
yes,
says this tweet just this morning, annoyed about the fact that Sessions needs only 50 votes to be confirmed. Blame Harry Reid. I'm not annoyed about that fact. Are you?
Not
David?
Particularly. I mean,
Trump's going to be the president. President gets to pick the people in the executive branch. If he gets a majority of the vote in the Senate, that's the way it works.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm
certainly upset that Trump won the election. I'm upset that Sessions is going to be the attorney general.
Sure. But
I'm not upset with the process.
No. I mean, it was obvious that we debated that. Well, what about when Democrats lose the majority and possibly the White House? Yeah, then we're going to be sad. Well, but then don't you think we should do it? No, I think we should go ahead with it now because in the meantime, I mean, you're going to be sad later anyway. This is going to happen eventually. If you think you can block, at that point we maybe had no idea of Trump, but if you think you can block the next crazy Republicans cabinet like forever, I mean, absent this past year with blocking of Garland thing, if you had gone around and asked Democrats, do you think you could block bad Supreme Court nominees forever? No matter who they were, no matter how many times the Republican president came back with different ones, plus maybe all of his cabinet, or do you think eventually we have to come up with something and Democrats fold and just say the president gets his choice? We wish it was somebody else, but at least we defeated the worst one of the bunch. Yeah, you'll be back. And if you didn't, and you actually stood in the way for 4 years, Republicans would have said, to hell with this. Remember that the nuclear option was their plan. All I did was pick it up.
They're absolutely going to nuke. I mean, but make them nuke, and let's just be done with it. I mean, it is what it is. My old position, or maybe you don't remember it, was I'm actually someone who thought the filibuster was defensible in judiciary picks because those were lifetime appointments, and believed that the filibuster should have been eliminated for everything else. The Democrats did it sort of backwards, and I know why. It made tactical sense, you wanted to put judges on the bench. Obviously, they saved it for the Supreme Court in theory, but it's like, I go back to this. How often is a Supreme Court nominee filibustered?
How often?
Yes.
Well, prior to this one, depending on what you mean by filibuster, the answer was usually never.
No, I mean the technical term, where there's 40 votes holding it up. See, because McConnell could have done something different. He could have just had a vote on it and voted it down.
Yeah.
Voted Garland down. He had the votes.
I mean, technically they didn't filibuster this one. They just said, we're not bringing it to the floor.
Right. I mean, I'm talking about the technical, because what did Harry Reid eliminate? He didn't eliminate the majority leader's prerogative to decide what comes to the floor.
No.
He ended the filibuster, and the filibuster is, very technically speaking, the cloture vote requiring 60 votes to close debate.
Right.
I mean, that's all it is. That's what he did. I mean, if you're going to blame Harry Reid, that's what you're blaming him for. McConnell could have, filibuster or no, McConnell could have, did what he did no matter what, which was not bring it to a vote.
Yeah.
That's the way that works. So the question that I ask you is, what was the filibuster really doing on these appointments? Most of the people who were rejected, Robert Bork got a vote.
Yeah.
Got voted down. John Tower got a vote. Got voted down. No, he got withdrawn. Right? I don't remember. But he could have, they would have, if they wanted to, he just didn't have the votes. He wasn't even close to the votes. So the filibuster hasn't really been something that stopped executive appointments, in my view. It absolutely did stop judicial appointments by the threat of it and the pocket veto nature of it, the blue slip process, which still exists, I know, because Leahy liked it and he was still giving blue slips, which is crazy, but okay. But outside the judiciary, I don't know that the filibuster was stopping appointments.
No, the better argument that is sometimes made is that it tempered the decision-making process on who would be nominated it was in the back of their minds. Okay, well, this guy, as much as I like him, is never going to clear a filibuster, so I'm not even going to put his name into contention. Give me somebody that's got a good chance of getting past a cloture vote. And I'm sure that it does affect that decision-making process. There are certainly, I'm sure, somewhere along the line, there were presidents who wanted someone different. But then again, I can't promise that that's the case. I mean, there was Bork. Who else would you? Aside of exhuming Hitler and saying, "Yep," there weren't that many people that they could have turned to that embodied those same awful principles and been recognized as a figure who belongs anywhere near the federal bench. I mean, you could pick anybody out of a hat, I guess, but the federal judiciary from which the Supreme Court nominees tend to be selected, even state judiciaries, they don't tend to be populated by complete loons from outer space all the time. There are some. So that's the only thing it does, is it arguably tempered the selection process. And I think Salissa's argument, to some extent, if they're going to give it any credit, I think he does try to get around to that there are people who are being named to positions that require Senate advice and consent that might otherwise never have been considered, but for the fact that they know that they can get them through on a party line vote. But I'm not, and Sessions, I guess, is supposed to be that guy, but senators don't get rejected a whole lot.
No matter how who does get rejected? I mean, give me the list of the people that didn't make it because of it. I mean, the ones that come to mind are like the first openly gay ambassador that Democrats wanted to name that somebody put a hold on. I forget what country he was, Denmark or something. It's crazy. I mean, I think people overstated it, and the reality is, let's be honest, David,
Oh, now?
It was a weapon for Republicans. It hardly
Yes.
ever was a weapon for Democrats.
Yeah, pretty rarely.
Democrats just don't do what Republicans do, for better or worse. Maybe it's for better, but they just don't.
No.
I made an observation, and I think you would agree with this. Switch parties. Clinton lost by 3 million votes.
Okay.
Won and only on electoral college by very slim margins.
Mm-hmm.
The intelligence community says the Russians interfered in her favor. Are you telling me we wouldn't be in a civil war right now? We'd have to redo the election. We would have a redo of this election if the places were reversed.
Yeah, I don't know how they would do that, but they would probably find a way.
They'd find a way. Everyone would agree that that was the right thing to do. The media would sign on board, and everybody would pressure Democrats, and we'd cave.
It's hard to believe otherwise, but it's hard to envision either way. But I certainly don't see people sitting still for it in the other direction. No,
it would be dominating everything we talked about.
Because emails, probably.
But it would be dominating everything we talked about. There would be no other topic of conversation in the United States today except how Russia stole the election from the good working Americans.
Yes. Well, I largely would agree with that.
Because they just play differently than we do. And for better or worse, maybe it's the responsible approach to governing and politics. It is what it is. I mean, at this point, I'm almost resigned to it.
Yeah.
But
I'm with you.
These obstructionist devices that really are 90% helpful to Republicans and maybe 10% helpful to Democrats.
Yes.
Get rid of them all.
I would agree.
And it's a net win for Democrats, always.
I got a question in an email from Daily Kos staffers yesterday. Say, what about all those holds we heard so much about in when Obama was nominating people and everything got put on hold? Why can we be putting all of his cabinet nominations on hold? No. I mean, you can try. Hey, I'm going to hold that. But the hold was always illusory. I explained the dynamics of it, but it depends on the other side, the majority, saying either I want your respect and mutual cooperation, and so therefore I will honor your request for a temporary delay or even a longer or forever. But all the hold ever was a proxy for the threat to filibuster. There is no such thing. There's no rule anywhere that says here's what you do to do a hold. You got to fill out Form 13B, whatever. You just are saying, I will object if you make a unanimous consent request to bring this nomination to the floor. And if you instead move to proceed to consideration of the nomination, I will filibuster that motion to proceed. And if you make a different kind, you can actually there's a motion that's non-debatable and not filibusterable to move into executive session to consider a nomination. But for a bill, you would filibuster the motion to proceed. And for a nomination, you just say, well, I'm going to filibuster the nomination. And then they'd count votes and decide whether they were going to win or lose. And if they thought they weren't going to get the 60 that they previously needed, or if they thought that they were going to not somehow get the 50 that they need now, then they would just say, all right, you win. We'll call it a hold instead of I just figured out we would lose a cloture vote.
Yep.
Now, of course, with it just needing a simple majority, the majority leader will say, what good is that? You want to hold. You think I can't get 50 on this? Okay, well, that's one problem with it. And the other would be, even if you needed it for, say, a Supreme Court nomination, where you would still need 60, they don't have to listen to that. They just would say, well, I tell you what, I'm going to call your bluff and we're going to have a cloture vote. And if you think you can win it, good for you. I think I can win it. There's no holds. There's the only thing there is about holds. Occasionally, if you want to extend, for whatever reason, and no skin off your nose, to extend a courtesy to someone asking for a hold, then you can do it. Or two, time is limited on the floor, and you say, I don't have the time to go through the aggravation even of getting a cloture vote on this nomination because this nomination is either not important to me or whatever. I need to pass the budget bill. That's what we need to spend our time on first, and so I'll let you hold it for the time being until I get around to now I need this nomination taken care of. So the answer is holds are something that Democrats said, yes, we'll be courteous to Republicans with. And on very rare occasions, Harry Reid said, to hell with your hold. Maybe twice, I think I saw him do that in all the years he was majority leader. And everywhere else, that's just Republicans are just going to say, no hold for you. Forget it. No, we're moving ahead because we have the votes. We could have done that at any time. We either chose not to or thought we might not have had the votes or thought it wasn't worth the floor time to deal with the cloture if it was a minor appointment of some kind or a judge to be more minor than some other piece of legislation, perhaps. But that was something we did for them and they won't do for us. That's the short answer.
Yeah, I mean, I would add just one reservation is the Democrats have used the filibuster pretty effectively on legislation.
Yes, and it's still there.
To get this or that they want in there. And, of course, Republicans do it, too. I'm against that on principle. I mean, I just think that there's no reason why if the majority of the Senate wants to approve legislation, it shouldn't be approved. I mean, what is the concept there?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's nothing. It's just something that they liked to use to work with, and I'm sure there was a time in which it made more sense, that bygone era where senators from opposing parties did actually say, "I want to be in agreement with you at the end. I would like for this to have bipartisan support. I want to incorporate your ideas because they're non-crazy." I don't think they're the best ones, but maybe it's best for the country if we have some of what you want and some of what I want. Back in those days, it made sense just as an internal rule, like, yeah, let's – I mean, you know what? I mean, all it is it was for all the screaming. We can't turn the Senate into the House. It's a Hastert rule for the Senate is all it is.
Yeah.
The Hastert rule was they sort of partisanized it. Nothing comes to the floor without at that time, originally 60%, when Newt Gingrich wanted to run it that way, 60% support, which you'll recognize as the same number over in the Senate side, 60% support among Republican conference, then we'll move it forward.
I mean, just from the political science perspective, is this an effective way of having accountable government? You vote for a party, listen, better or worse, Republicans now control the government.
Yeah.
They should be able to to the degree that there are people who will vote for things, they should be able to implement their policies and then face the voters on it. Am I advocating a more parliamentary system? Yes, I am. You vote them in, they do a bad job, you vote them out.
Yeah. Well, it's the system most people either think they have or
I know, and they don't. It's
some
amazing.
Other portion of voters, somewhat more informed voters, actually, know about the filibuster, but they tend to think things like, nothing really terrible will happen because it'll get filibustered, and I don't know whether that really makes them weak supporters or weak voters or weak activists, and they let certain things pass, or it's okay if that one gets elected and they don't campaign nationally to make sure that guy doesn't get in or change the numbers in the Senate, etc. And now you have to pay closer attention to those things. And all right, well, that was one of the arguments that Matt Iglesias made at the Netroots Nation back in, I think the last one that was in Las Vegas. What was that, 2011? We were discussing filibuster reform, and he was making just that argument. At some point, people should be able to expect that the party that wins the majority in the Senate, certainly, and certainly if they win the entirety of the government, that all the policies coming out of it from here on in are the responsibility of that party, and you should vote appropriately both now and in the next election.
Absolutely. listen, I just ran across what I think is a pretty good piece.
Uh-huh.
I'll DM it to you.
Okay.
That talks about, I'm doubling back, how Sessions is really the embodiment of Trumpism. It comes from Vox.
Explain
her opening line is very good. Trumpism isn't getting a confirmation hearing in the U.S. Senate, but the confirmation hearing of Jeff Sessions, nominated to be Attorney General of the Trump administration, is the next best thing. I think that's really an underplayed story. Jeff Sessions was incredibly close, and as I said before, staffed the Trump administration both on the policy side, and basically the virulent racism that Trump's campaign became really is a direct pipeline from Sessions.
Well, it's a good point. Of course, the title of the piece is "The Fight Over Jeff Sessions' Attorney General Nomination Explained." Because I think that has to be the title of everything, but in case you're looking for it. Dara Lind, I guess, the writer here.
Yeah, I mean, they have a better Twitter
okay.
Headline than they do with the actual, because it's not an explained, in my view. They don't really explain the nuts and bolts of it. It's really how did they call it? Let me
find the tweet.
Find the tweet.
It was from Vox.
I saw it retweeted. I'll find it.
Well,
but here it is. Jeff Sessions' confirmation hearing is a referendum on Trumpism.
That's
via Vox.com, and that's a good underreported story. People, Sessions is objectionable on his own, of course.
Yes. Right. He was defeated before he was a referendum on anything in 86.
Exactly. So, and I understand that focus is right, but it's also a larger story of where Trump came from.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I hope it gets prominent play in the hearings.
It goes to a point that I've been trying to make about trying to understand the Trump phenomenon, and people have fixated on white working class voters and economic anxiety, and putting aside the mocking of the term, I really do think it misses the point. I mean, Jefferson Sessions is the embodiment of the Trump movement. And that's why I really do recommend this Vox article. It was always about race for Trump. And yes, trade was part of it, but it's not like he was fighting for poor people. He wasn't saying, the trade argument even in itself is a subset of race-based appeal. Particularly the China part, and the Mexico part. It's a race-based theory of looking at the world. And Jeff Sessions draws a direct line to Donald Trump. Of course, it's particularly important in that the Attorney General's job, in many respects, is almost beyond the crime stuff that they deal with, and probably more than they should. But be that as it may, it's also enforcement of civil rights laws. It's enforcement of voting rights laws. Sessions is against all those things, and Trump is too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the basic fact. They're pretty open about it. So I don't know what there is to hide in that.
No, there isn't. But it's we sort of untethered Sessions from the entire Trump movement and discussing his confirmation. And I'm I applaud Vox for bringing this side of the story to it, because it's really important to understand that Sessions is the highest expression of Trumpism. Mm-hmm. This is the essence of what the Trump movement is. Sessions really does represent it. So in that sense, there's an argument that, they won the election. He gets to pick the guy who embodies what he stood for.
Yeah.
I voted against it because I voted against Trump, and if I'm a senator, Democratic senator, I was elected to oppose you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the part that's weird. This whole working together thing. I don't agree with you on anything. What am I supposed to work with you on?
No, nothing. I mean, that's not your obligation.
Either you have the votes or you don't for that kind of stuff. Budgets, okay, we have to work on the budget because we need the budget to run the government. But to the degree that the budget is policy choices, why, I just don't see this whole argument about it. You're representing the people that elected you. And the people that elect Democrats, by and large, Joe Manchin accepted, maybe Heidi Heitkamp. I mean, they're going to do what they have to do to try and win. I get that. But the rest of the Democratic caucus, what are you working with them on?
No, there ought not to be any reason to do it.
I'm just curious, what is it that they're going to work with them on?
Nothing. I don't know. I've got zero for you.
Well, we want to repeal the Affordable Care Act. We don't.
Yeah.
So we're voting against. Do you have enough votes to do it? No? Okay, well, I guess you can't do it. You do? Well, I guess you did it.
Yeah.
What else is there to say about these things?
Not much.
That's why I'm always sort of amazed by these things. And it's just so Kamala Harris, newly elected from California, what is she supposed to do with Trump? How is she supposed to work with Trump? And in that sense, I'm not going to bash Bernie Sanders because he had a very good night last night. I mean, he had some bad things he said, but I thought he was good yet last night. And I liked that he understood, for the most part, that Trump is a problem.
Yeah, I mean,
and you can't, and saying you want to work with him and you're going to test him, you're not going to test him. He's already failed.
Yeah. Well, yeah, at some point it just becomes rhetoric. These are the things that you say when you are a senator and you want to sound responsible. Well, I'll keep an open mind. I don't see much area for agreement, but hey, hopefully, I hope for the country to succeed, and to the extent that requires the president to succeed, fine. But,
I don't agree with that because Trump succeeding, at least the theory of Democrats, is bad for the country.
Yeah. All you can do is say, to the extent where they coincide, I'll be working with them to do that. I think it's good for the country. I'll do it.
I was not one of those people that got all outraged when McConnell said his first order of business is trying to stop Obama.
Of
course it was.
His job is, yeah.
And, well, look at that. I mean, it was us. It was our side saying, well, look, that's what he wanted to do from day one.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Well, he said so.
The problem wasn't McConnell in 2009. It was Democrats. We had 59, 60, and we kept playing. Obama's problem was he kept hoping Olympia Snowe or Susan Collins would go along with something, which you remember.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, we play by these old rules that Republicans don't. You mentioned that we had 59 or 60. We had 60. It was there for the taking. But instead we said, well, we want everybody, we don't want any questions about legitimacy. Let's let the process play out with Al Franken. We think the facts will lead to his inevitable seating, and we're willing to let the process play itself out. Whereas, yeah, and it's true, it did, and they might feel vindicated in doing that, and they might have thought, well, he would have been defeated for re-election if we had simply voted to seat him. But that's typically what gets done. It's just that, I guess in the C-SPAN era, we haven't seen much of it, but when there are contested elections like that, especially in the House, they screw around for a little while, and then they put out a report. The majority puts out a report. If the member whose election is being contested is one of ours, we accept them. If it's the other way around, or, the facts say the Democrat should be seated, to hell with it. We seat the Republican, and vice versa. And they did it with fair frequency. But they decided, let's wait 6 months, a year, however long it takes for the facts to play out. Because then people will say, well, I disagree with the outcome, but at least the process was fair. And then nobody said it. Nobody said it. We were without a vote for the longest time, and things couldn't happen. And we ended up, trying to limp our way through some of these things that could have been done procedurally in a different way, i.e., and so what did they? The upshot was they spent the next 8 years screaming, reconciliation is this horrible, tyrannical whatchamahoozy. They made it up on the fly, and then of course, as soon as they got control, well, we're going to use this horrible thing to teach you a lesson, and the whole Affordable Care Act was illegitimate in some way because reconciliation had been used somewhere in the process, nobody ever understanding exactly why it had been used or where or for what purpose, and it was not out of the ordinary.
People just, we don't remember things? The Bush tax cuts of 2003 were by reconciliation.
We don't. I mean, you and I remember them.
Dick Cheney cast the tie-breaking vote.
Yeah. That would be, of course, world on fire, front page news if the roles were reversed, like you said before. I mean, the idea that a Democratic program that Republicans were making such a big deal out of were to I mean, the first time, I guess the next time a Democratic initiative passes in the Senate with a Democratic vice president casting the tie-breaking vote, is, again, back to Civil War disruption. Oh my God, it's so corrupt. It's horrible. It's outrageous. Because the things that we want to pass are terrible communist crap, and the things that they want to pass is awesome freedom stuff. And so, therefore, what about the optics? Oh my God! And you'll have the Chris Salitzes of the world saying, "Well, geez, I don't know this Democratic program." Whereas tax cuts, everybody's for them. We all love getting tax cuts, but we don't get them. That's the problem. They're all going elsewhere. And you said you loved balanced budgets yesterday, and now you don't because this is throwing the budget into disarray. Yeah, but tax cuts. Okay, what? Yeah, it would have been, and so that's the backwards workout of let's be reasonable with the Al Franken situation is that instead of 8 years of Al Franken is illegitimate, it was 8 years of the Affordable Care Act is illegitimate because reconciliation, and you used reconciliation because we denied you the 60th vote earlier in the process, and so therefore you used this other procedure to do some tweaking that you could ordinarily have done under regular order if you'd had your 60 votes instead. And so, I don't know. I mean, I guess if you had said Al Franken is illegitimate, and then what? What's the upshot of, say, getting rid of Al Franken? Well, it's bad. We want him in the Senate. But instead, the upshot is we're going to get rid of the Affordable Care Act and 30 million people are at risk of dying. Well, maybe we should have installed Al Franken.
Exactly. Well, look, to be honest with you, Obama was there's some misimpression that he could work with Republicans. But look, people decide, they take approaches. He got a lot done afterwards, and he did what he could do, I guess, under the circumstances. But it's just this illusion of comedy that is. There hasn't been comedy for forever, and that's okay. We don't need comedy. We just need procedures that allow a governing party to govern, whether it's mine or theirs. Mm-hmm. And then the voters decide whether they like what happened or not.
Yeah. I mean, there's a comment hanging out here that I'm not certain what it's attached to, but I'm sure it's part of this discussion. One or both of us is a cynical a-hole because government isn't us versus them; it's to work for the good of all. And while it's
sure,
yes, it is, but
who disagrees with that? People,
nobody. It's just the definition of what's good for all gets written by the people with the most votes. I mean,
exactly.
Democrats think that their programs are the best for all. Republicans sometimes, I think that their program is best for all, but then I also know that, and yeah, I mean, if you want to say both sides, I can certainly, I guess, with a little research, dig up the same kind of, or I guess I can certainly dig up a hypothetical, but occasionally parties in the national legislature, in Congress, do say, I could stand by brewing a little bit of disaster so long as I think it's going to be visited on the other side. the purpose of which is for us to either win the majority or secure a larger majority and then do things that are for the good of all. But I guess one of the big problems in the last 10 plus years, for various reasons, has been that the Republican Party has not got much in the way of policy proposals that really are for the good of all. Sometimes they try to argue that they are, give gigantic tax cuts to the richest, and then it will trickle down to all of you. Does anybody believe that that's the case? Republicans in the Senate might, but it isn't, and nobody else thinks so. So what do you do with that? You might say, well, they are trying to work for what they believe is the good of all. However, I have reality on my side, and I'm just going to have to cut their legs out from underneath them to prevent them from doing the wrong thing for what they think are the right reasons.
Exactly. It's just a question of the votes. Either they have the votes or they don't. Look, I know you're down to 9 minutes, but I think there's one interesting thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it involves this Meryl Streep story. And now there's these
yes.
protests at the Sessions thing, people dressed in Klansman outfits and stuff.
Fun.
And I'm sure there's going to be
Not
some Democrat or progressive writer who's going to poo-poo and say,
oh,
that's not good because yada, yada. And I'm like,
yes,
come on.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, it could possibly take the spotlight off of something else happening around those hearings, which I think is special and worth noting. That Senator Cory Booker, says he'll actually testify against Sessions' nomination, which that don't happen very often.
No,
but that should be a gigantic headline, and I guess people will say, and it might really be. They might be absolutely right. Now we're going to have big headlines about protesters instead, and that's going to make the very serious people of Washington wring their hands and say, "You cost us."
They were
the
going
headline.
to anyway. That's all they ever do. I mean, this is one thing, and I'm going to sign off after this. Stop worrying what the media thinks. The media is useless. More than ever. I mean, I've been saying it for 10 years, but now I'm finally right. Do you really care what the New York Times thinks anymore?
I try not to, though I am going to pay them.
Yeah, but do you see what I'm getting at? It's not like Republicans care. Why should we care? They certainly aren't catering to us. I mean, they're terrible. So it's like, they're going to tut us? I just don't see that that's an issue.
Yeah.
I remember all this in 2006 and how we were bad and we couldn't do it that way. And, of course, they won big in 2006, the Democrats, despite all the terrible things that people like Daley Kos had done to weaken the Democratic case. Because that's not how it works. Particularly when you're the out party, if you're going to win, it's because the other side gets rejected, and that's what you want to do is help the populace get to the point of rejecting them.
Yeah,
that's just the way it is. Anyway, you got 7 minutes. I'm going to let you finish up.
Okay.
And thanks for letting me.
Thank you for helping.
Reiterate my theory of if you won, you get to govern.
Yeah, well, a lot of people probably agree with it.
Okay. Talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, Armando. And that does help get us all closer to the end of the show. And that was always the goal in all of this. Other things that I guess we need to note in wrapping things up, Will, we got to the Cory Booker bit, so that's quite something. Not only do senators rarely get rejected for nominations, that's usually because of the Senate committee, to pronounce that very carefully. But guess what? This time somebody is going to speak up. And honestly, it's a rare thing to testify against a sitting senator. I mean, I guess there's very little danger in it, especially if we believe that he is going to clear the bar and become attorney general. There's little danger in terms of angering a colleague. I mean, I guess he'll anger other colleagues who are friends with Jeff Sessions. And then, of course, there's always the issue of Jeff Sessions saying, I now have an enemy in Cory Booker, and perhaps he might think in New Jersey as well. And to the extent that Sessions is the embodiment of Trumpism, and I think I agree largely, you'll have two people in agreement. Though the president and attorney general both will think that perhaps the people of New Jersey are somehow now legitimate targets. Now, interestingly, Chris Christie, who will not be a part of the administration, he thought quite like that. That's what the whole Bridgegate thing was about, right? If he loses or doesn't secure the endorsement of the mayor of Fort Lee, then the people of Fort Lee are legitimate targets. I will take it out on them. I will ruin their commutes and destroy their lives, at least for a couple of days, with some nonsense about closing lanes on the George Washington Bridge. And that's like a legitimate function of the executive here in New Jersey. Now, he's not made it in, but of course we were reminded at the beginning of the show that Jared Kushner is likely to be a part of Trump's advisory team. And as much personal animosity as there was between the Kushner family and Chris Christie, the one thing that Kushner has had that's been, well, positive from his view to say about Chris Christie is that he thought Bridgegate was actually like a hard-ass move. I forget exactly what term he used but he thought that was great. That's how you should be running government. You teach those people a lesson when they cross you. And that's the guy they'll team up with, the ultimate in, taking things personally, Donald Trump, and the place from which he derives his racist ideology, or at least the racist elements of his ideology, or what we're calling his ideology, and that's Jeff Sessions and his staffer, who's transferring over to the White House as well, Stephen Miller. We read a little bit about him. Maybe we'll have to revisit some of that over the next couple of days. There's plenty more where that came from, and of course lots of things we didn't even get to today, but we'll be back tomorrow. Hopefully my voice will be with me, and so will Joan McCarter, and she'll help me get through the second half of the show. There's probably much more that we need to pack in, but that's it. It's time to hand the reins over to the guys at the after show. And where's my music? There we go. Let's play that tune. That reminds us, of course, that it's time to hand the reins over. Let's get through the usual summary of what's. Oh my goodness! Look at this. No after show today. Look at that. I was on the Tim Caramel show that dropped yesterday, so we'll go with that. Oh, okay. And after show will be back on Wednesday. So that leaves us with a couple of minutes to talk about a few other things, I suppose. What? I have no idea. We're not going to be able to do that much in the next 2 minutes or so. But I guess I'll keep you guys up to date on what's going on with this latest project. The basics of it is that Daily Kos is going to be working with a number of, all of you guys, essentially, and the entire progressive community, of course, now becoming very interested in Senate procedure and in what ways we may be able to slow down or deny floor time enough to implement the worst of the Trump/DC Republican agenda. Will it be all about appointments? Will they skip over some of those appointments? Will they have much more besides attempting to repeal the Affordable Care Act in their bag of tricks? Probably. I mean, this is their best shot at pulling the mischief, and the less floor time we afford them, the less they'll be able to accomplish, and we'll be keeping an eye on what Democrats are doing to fight that.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, so the upshot of that is that there may be days when the Senate is in session early in the morning, 9 a.m. perhaps, maybe a little bit later, where we're going to have to keep a close eye on exactly what's happening, who's requesting what, and what Democrats are doing to stretch things out and to encourage them to fight harder if necessary. That might sometimes get in the way of the show. We'll have to wonder about that.